Hello and welcome to week 28, the final week of history for this second semester and for this school year. We got two lessons this week. We'll try to extrapolate and give you a decent video here, even though there's only two lessons this week. But again, just a reminder, April 24th is the due date for your end of the year projects. Again, we're listing your top 10 lessons for the school year, and if you need some more information on it, you can go to our Google Classroom. But basically, I want to hear from you as to what your top 10 lessons were. You can go through the book if you want to, and look at the if you want to go back and look through the index at all the lessons that we've had over the years. You can most certainly do that. But again, just a few sentences on each, a paragraph or so, and you don't have to retell what the lesson was about, but tell me why you liked it, why you thought it was impressive, why it was worth remembering, and be creative as you want to. But again, you don't have to give me the who, what, where, when, and why the lesson. We know the lesson. We want to know why it's important to you. Two lessons this week. We are going to start off with the formation of a Protestant religious sect that we've got some familiarity with around here. We've talked about the Protestant Reformation, the breakaway from the Catholic Church, and all of the different subgroups within that big umbrella of Protestantism. We're going to go back now to the group called the Swiss Brethren. Remember them forming in the Switzerland area, south of France, not long after Martin Luther nailed the thesis up. This is the Swiss Brethren broke away from the regular Protestant movement. They were called the Anabaptists. It was a pejorative nickname. They didn't like it, but it kind of stuck. They were greatly persecuted because they were very, very strict about the sacrament of baptism. They did not believe in infant baptism. They were very, very different than your regular Protestants. Protestants, of course, had major problems with the Catholic Church. Well, the Swiss Brethren went even further out than your standard Lutherans or something like that. Anyway, they were greatly persecuted, and they were forced to flee Switzerland, and they sort of went off different directions under different leaders. In time, a guy that I think we mentioned earlier, Menno Simons, provided leadership to many of the brethren in Germany, and Menno became the Mennonites, and they were pretty plentiful in Germany in the 17th century. Now within the Mennonites, we've got some disagreement. A fellow by the name of Jacob Ammann, A-M-N-A-N, was a member of the Mennonites, the Brotherhood, and he was a very strict dude. Again, this whole sect kind of formed out of doctrinal purity, real strictness. Well, Ammann was very strict in and of itself. He was of the belief that if a church member got out of line, then it was the church's responsibility to ban them and cut them off from the rest of the congregation. Now, you can see where some of the early Protestants might have looked at this and said, boy, that sure sounds a lot like excommunication in the old Catholic Church. But Ammann said it was the only way to keep the church spiritually pure by not having members that are not adhering to the doctrine. Shunned members of the congregation, in Ammann's views, were not supposed to buy, sell, trade, or even eat with church members. When they talk about excommunication, a shunning, if you will, Ammann was very big on that. Now, the Mennonite leadership in Germany at the time thought that was taking it a little too far. Between 1693 and 1696, Jacob broke away from the Mennonite congregation and took a lot of followers with him. He would say it wasn't a different belief, but rather a difference in, quote, method and spirit, which led him to separate. Jacob's followers adopted many other practices that made them distinct, and so from his name, Ammann, came the Amish. Now, we're somewhat familiar with the Amish community around here. There was a pretty thriving Amish community just south of Danville in Caswell County for a number of years. If you've ever shopped at Yoder's Country Store in Yanceyville, that was started by the Amish community there. And, of course, they were very distinctive in that they rejected a lot of modern society's conveniences. Again, Jacob Ammann was very, very strict, and he believed it was very important for church members to dress very plainly, to be very unified in their dress, so as not to draw attention to themselves. Married men were to wear untrimmed beards and wide-brimmed hats. Women wore dark skirts and bonnets. They still do. And even the old order Amish still don't use buttonholes. They use hooks and eyes to keep the garments as plain looking as possible. It was from these Dutch Mennonites that Jacob Ammann borrowed the biblical custom of foot washing and made that a regular practice. The Amish traditionally worship in homes. We've talked about some of the Protestant sects before the Scottish Covenanters who thought even a church building was immodest. They refer to the Ordnung, which is a set of unwritten rules of the church. Upon baptism, a member of the Amish church is obligated to uphold the rules of the Ordnung or face excommunication, shunning. Like the Mennonites, the Amish are opposed to taking any kind of oath at all. They are opposed to military service. They choose not to vote. Children are not educated past the 8th grade. And of course, the Amish are probably most famous for not using modern innovations like electricity, automobiles, telephones. They believe that inventions of this type lead to laziness and worldliness. They're probably not wrong, but I'm not very interested in that. But because they had no pastimes involving video games or electricities over the centuries, Amish have become exceptional at producing sturdy furniture, hand-sewn quilts, fresh baked goods. If you ever go to Yoder's, it's some yummy, yummy food. And, of course, Amish are famous for their barn raisings. A whole community will get together on a Saturday morning, and by the end of the day, they will have a very large, fully functional barn tripped out. One day is all it takes. And, of course, they're not using any electric saws or anything like this. They're using hand saws, hammer nails, and all that. Jacob Ammann believed that no one outside of the Anabaptists could receive Christ's salvation. Therefore, the Amish do not recruit members from the outside. You'll never see an Amish stop you and tell you about the Amish lifestyle. They do not evangelize, which seems at odds with Jesus' Great Commission, where we're supposed to go out into the world and share the good news. The Amish do not follow that at all. They think that only people who are baptized into the Anabaptist tradition will receive Christ's salvation. There are no Amish in Europe today. When the New World opened up, the Amish saw the religious freedom that was being offered here, and they pretty much left en masse. There's really not even a trace of the Amish in Europe today. And of course, the first place they settled here was Pennsylvania. You remember William Penn forming the Quaker state, and even though it was founded by Quakers, all religions were welcome in Pennsylvania, and the Amish took advantage for that. And of course, they had a very thriving, I should say, community in Pennsylvania for many, many years. Now, evidently, they pull up stakes every so often and move en masse. It's unusual because I don't think the community in Caswell County is still there. But there's about 100,000 Amish today in the U.S. So they're very much a minority, but again, they're very conspicuous, and I respect anyone who could live in this world and stick to their religious beliefs, which dictate they can't use electricity. I'll give them props for that. All right, final lesson of the year is going to be about one of the most interesting people that we've talked about. Not interesting in a way like Leonardo da Vinci, being just a genius at several different things, A man of extremes. We're talking about Peter the First of Russia, Peter the Great, as he named himself. One of the most striking characteristics about Peter the Great was that he was a gigantic man. He was 6 feet 8 inches tall, which even today, that's a tall drink of water. At the time, though, the average height of an adult male was about 5'4", 5'5". So this big strapping 6'8" guy would have stood out, almost the equivalent of someone who's 7 feet tall today. He was very very athletic, very muscular. He cut quite an impressive figure. He was probably the strongest, most intimidating leader Russia has ever had. He was curious while being crude. He was a genius and a buffoon. He did a lot to improve Russia, but most of his people despised him, and he did a lot to keep Russia back, too. He was a man of extremes. Never boring, but not a good person in the end. After the death of Ivan the Terrible, Russia slipped into a period of chaos and confusion. They called it the Time of Troubles. To end the period, 50 cities sent representatives to a meeting and voted Michael Romanov as the Tsar of Russia, and thus began the Romanov dynasty. Peter I was one of like a half dozen kids, and a couple of his older brothers and sisters died. He had a the only brother that was older than him was insane, so he was not going to be king. But Peter was raised in the castle, raised amongst the royal family. His older sister took over after the father died because there was no male ready to take over. So Peter was kind of being groomed, but kind of not. His older sister planned on keeping this for herself, and it was only she apparently was exceedingly unpopular because all Peter had to do was turn 17, and they said, "That's it. We're supporting Peter. Get out of here." By 1696, Peter I became the sole Tsar of Russia, and Russia would never be quite the same. Peter was fascinated with Europe. Again, we've talked mostly about Europe this semester, and at this point of history, Europe had really advanced civilization-wise, socially, beyond Russia. Russia kind of caught in that middle. They're not east, they're not west. That's always been the issue with Russia. So vast, but literally caught in the middle of east and west. Which way do they go? You remember when we talked about the formation of the Kievan Rus, that they broke away from the Holy Catholic Church and cast their lot with the Byzantine Empire. So they made a very purposeful move then to align themselves with Eastern Orthodoxy, and the Eastern Orthodox Church became very big in Russia. But Peter looked west and saw all of these wonderful things going on in Europe, and he thought there's no reason in the world we can't bring that kind of prosperity to Russia. Unfortunately, he was going to have to step on a lot of toes and do more than step on toes in order to make this really kind of fundamental change. He was fascinated with shipbuilding. Even as a young kid, he was always building ships. He saw that Russia would always be a second-rate power unless they could be a maritime power. They had to trade on the seas. Now, the geography of Russia at 1700 didn't show any ports. They had a couple of inlands, the Caspian Sea and whatnot, but in terms of the oceans, the only access they had to the ocean was the always frozen Arctic Ocean. So Peter set his sight on claiming territory, expanding the boundaries of Russia so they could have a port where he would build a navy to not only have military power, but economic power. Before all this, not long after he was named Tsar, he went on an adventure. For the next 18 months, he disguised himself as a pauper, a 6'8" gigantic pauper, but a pauper nonetheless, and traveled throughout Europe, and just to soak in the culture, to get ideas. Now, on occasion, it was discovered that this big peasant is actually the Tsar of Russia, and he would let the mask slip and would, speak with leaders then, but One of Peter's great reforms when he got back to Russia was something. He insisted that his countrymen trim off their beards. Wearing a beard was more than a fashion statement to the Russians. Again, we talked about the Russian Orthodox Church. They believed that God wore a beard and that men created in God's image should do the same. We just talked about the Amish, who were very purposeful about beards. Now here comes this crazy young czar back from a trip that he didn't tell too many people about, and he's telling people they got to trim their beards. And he meant it. If you had a beard, you were going to pay a high tax. And there was a chance if Peter saw you, he was going to cut your beard himself. Like I said, he was a little out there. He cut the sleeves off of garments of people because he saw that as an Eastern thing, and he wanted Russia to be more Western, more modern. He was just a brutish person. Apparently an amazing drunkard in that he could just drink all day and was probably a functioning alcoholic. He considered himself the head of the Church of Russia. Why? Because he was Tsar. Remember Henry VIII in England? If you're going to be a total Tsar, you're going to be a Tsar, you're going to be a total Tsar, in Peter's words. So he took the land of monasteries and built houses on there. He was notorious for driving his staff and his military to the extreme. Under Peter, they collected taxes on boots, hats, berths, beehives, chimneys, cellars, marriages, and of course beards. It was a bit ridiculous. Begging became common. Russia's economy really suffered. He revised, though, in terms of social reforms, he revised the Russian alphabet. He started the first Russian newspaper. He opened a free museum. So again, he just strikes me as someone who was just, endlessly energetic and full of ideas. Also, a mark in his favor, he allowed religious freedom in Russia. There were Jews, Catholics, Lutherans, Calvinists that were worshipped freely in Peter the Great's Russia. He tried to advance education by bringing in expert teachers from the West. So he was genuinely interested in Russia becoming a power and improving their way of life. But his methods were brutal. I'm leaving out a lot of stuff. He was big into torture of people that he did not like. He eventually got his port. They attacked the Swedish-owned strip of land near the Baltic Sea, and as soon as they had secure control of that, Peter sent in more armies and engineers to build the city of St. Petersburg. Thousands of soldiers and workers died trying to hastily build this city and port. But they built a spectacular city. So spectacular, in fact, that Peter moved the capital of Russia from Moscow to St. Petersburg. It became the window to the West that Peter dreamed of. After the founding of St. Petersburg, he was declared Emperor of all Russia after defeating the Swedes in 1721. Well, Peter reminds me a little bit of Herod in that he was a great builder, but he was also paranoid. He had his son eventually killed so he would not take the throne from him. As it turned out, Peter the Great died at age 52 from a series of internal illnesses. So was he great? Well, he was certainly great in scope, insofar as what he did had a long shelf life. But he was a very brutal person, and it was ironic that someone that was so brutal was also so interested, so much of a forward thinker. Peter the Great was a bad person, but he had some very good ideas, and a lot of them really shaped even the Russia we see today. Anyway, we'll talk more about this Monday. Enjoy.